Welcome back to the Upside Down Health Podcast. Today's episode number 9, and my guest is Coach Stoic Venable. I'm very excited for this podcast. I don't even know where to start with an introduction. I was texting Stuart earlier this week about how, after researching some of his podcasts that he's been on, learning more about him, it seems like he's lived very multiple lives. And what I mean by that is he's an Army veteran. He's a former lieutenant in Leavenworth Penitentiary. He's a retired federal law enforcement officer, college strength coach, a teacher. Now he's a teacher, head strength coach and conditioning in Lincoln, Nebraska at a high school. And, he coaches strength, but I keep seeing this wisdom that goes deeper, and the one personal experience. Me and Stuart aren't like best friends. We're not super connected yet, but like this one experience of you giving that presentation about the teenage brain. I've never seen someone talk the way you did, the way you commended attention. So I'm really excited that you're here today. Thanks for being here, Stuart.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Max. It is my pleasure. It's an honor for me to be on your podcast, and I'm just grateful for the invite.
Oh, as a fair warning for people listening, like I said, Stuart has experience working at a prison, so we're going to spend some time talking about that today. I don't know what Stuart wants to talk about, what he'll share, but it's possible we could get into some graphic, maybe some ideas that you just might want to be prepared for. So you don't want to be caught off guard with that. With that being said, though, we'll just keep it nice and light to start. You've read a lot of books. We're not in your library, but you've got stacks and stacks of books. So you're clearly like this lifelong learner. What are 3 books that have had a massive impact on your health, on your mental health?
Yeah, that is a difficult question because I've read so much. It's difficult to pick just 3 books that have had that type of impact on me. I would say I could easily pick 3 genres that have had that impact on me. So if I had to pick 3 genres, I would say religious texts, I would say Stoic philosophy, and as of the last decade, neuroscience, anything to be done with human behavior, social psychology, how the brain works, why people do the things that they do. So those would be the 3 genres I'd say that I have read from that have really impacted my life, my mental health, and my well-being. I don't know if you want me to go deeper into that or not.
Yeah. What's your interest in Stoic philosophy, and like what are some important things you've learned from that worldview?
So my interest in Stoic philosophy started when I was working at the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth. This inmate handed me this book and he said, "This is the most important book ever written. It's more important than the Bible," he said. And I was born and raised a Christian. For him to say that, he got my attention with that. And the book was the Discourses by Epictetus. And it was a very interesting book. And it did get my attention, but just the fact of the way he framed that when he presented it to me, it was enough for me to read the book, but it didn't really stick because I had been raised as a Christian and the Bible is the most important book. So when somebody else gives you something, say it's more important than the book you've been told your entire life was the most important book, it kind of made me feel some kind of way about that statement. But he planted a seed with that book. And that led me to a couple of years later, Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way, the Ego is the Enemy. And from there, it was Katie Bar the Door.
So how do you enact Stoic philosophy in your like day-to-day life?
And one of the tenets, or I'd say Stoic philosophy is based on the main principle is there are things within your control and things outside of your control. And you should be able to look at every situation that occurs and see what side they fall on, whether within your control or outside of your control. And if something falls within your control, then you can act accordingly and have some control over the outcome. But if it's something outside of your control, don't waste your time worrying about that because you don't control that anyway. So you have to be indifferent about it. And that was really a hard concept for me to grasp, but it's been beneficial for me, especially over the past decade.
Yeah, it's interesting because we hear that concept. I've heard it many times, and people represent it with a circle, and there's an inner circle and outer circle. But then to actually enact it, like in those circumstances, say the one common example I hear people say is that you're driving and someone cuts you off. How do you act? Uh, so what are some other like? Are there any specific examples you can name where you actually have looked at the situation, realized you're not in control of that, and then set back into how you want to behave?
Well, yeah, you take it every day. When I teach, there's students in my weight training class that don't have a desire to be there, but they end up in my class. Initially, my reaction to that was, you're in class, here are the standards. You either meet the standards or I'm going to throw you out. Everything was with me was get out, get out. Well, when you put them out of your class like that, then they become somebody else's problem. And initially that didn't bother me because they were toxic in my environment. If I got them out of there, I wouldn't have to worry about them being a rotten tomato and infecting the other kids. So I just get them out of there. When then security has to pick them up, they have to take them somewhere. You end up writing a referral behind that. They end up going to talk to an administrator, and then it's just a lot of paperwork and things that follow that. What I've learned is when I come back to that Stoic philosophy is I can't control what a child or a student is going to do. That's out of my control. I still have the class. I still have the expectations. But if they don't want to do what I require, I just reflect it on their grade because I can control their grade. Throwing them out in the hall or tell them to get out, and some of them get upset when you tell them to leave. They kick the trash can over on the way out the door. They'll slam the door, to go out yelling and cussing and disrupt the entire class. All that's unnecessary, where if Max, you're in my class and I said we're squatting and you don't want to squat, instead of you getting your 10 points for the day, you get a 0 for the day because I can control that grade book. I can control the training. I can control what you get for your grade that day, but I can't control how you act or how you respond to what I put up there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're saying that you don't want to buy into this emotional charge that they're throwing at you. They want you to buy in, but then especially young kids, so you take a step back, you realize, okay, I can only control what I can do, and then you behave the way you want to.
Right. And again, it goes back to, like you're saying, when you asked about the books for my mental health, it wasn't good for me to be going back and forth numerous times a day with a 15-year-old. Like, why am I getting my blood pressure up with a 15-year-old? And, 30 minutes from now, they've forgotten about it. And I'm still need another blood pressure pill. So yeah, when I go back to my Stoic philosophy, look, I can't control what Max is doing. If Max doesn't want to squat, don't squat. I just take Max's points and they reflect on his grade, and I just keep going about my day.
I think it's a great place to start this podcast off, just staying in your control. And I like how you mentioned that bit about how you were, it's my way or the highway kind of. And I'd like to dive a little bit into how you got there, because you did have maybe your military background had a little bit to do with that. So can you share how you got involved with the military, and what did it teach you about, being a tough man?
Yes, so I graduated from high school, June 1981, and within a week of my graduation, I was on a train headed to Alabama for training. From there, I went to Fairbanks, Alaska for a little over 3 years, and then I re-enlisted and went to Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, two totally different places. After the end of my 7 years, I ended my term in service, honorably discharged. And the thing I learned from the military about mental toughness is that there is no such thing as mental toughness. In the military, it's instilled in you that you're either trained or untrained. There is no mental toughness. And when something happens, we'll say when the feces hits the proverbial oscillator, then you either rise or fall to the level of your training. That's why we spend so much time training soldiers, so you're prepared when the balloon goes up. And so what I see today in my teaching and coaching environment, and coaches, we're going to run the crap out of the kids, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, doesn't matter. You make a mistake, we're going to run the crap out of you. You make a mistake, we're going to run all your teammates. That's going to make you mentally tough. It's not going to make them mentally tough. It's not going to do anything for them except make them tired and make them hate physical training. If you want them to get better, say at free throws, then practice doing free throws. And that's what the military taught us. Whatever it is I want you to get good at, we practice that over and over and over. There is no, I'll run you till snot comes out of your nose and then you'll be better at free throws. That makes absolutely no sense. So the military's view on that is you either train or untrain. There's no in between.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. It's a very interesting perspective. Do you see like an evolution of your mind though? Say the beginning when you first start training to 2 years later, having gone through all that training and pushing through the hard moments, do you get now mentally tough in a way, like that toughness factor of pushing through?
Yes. So I think what you would call, or most people would call that toughness factor, is what we would call a highly trained, motivated individual, a highly trained, motivated soldier. You've been trained to such an elite level that regardless of what happens, you're prepared for it.
I like
Make
it.
sense?
Yeah, I like it because it just puts an emphasis on training, and that's just show up kind of thing. Like I guess you seem like you're more of this do it every day and you will just get better. Is that kind of the philosophy you hold?
Right. And that is a philosophy. I mean, the entire time I was in the military, we were always training. And when you weren't training, you're actually performing the things that you've trained for. And even on your downtime, we have a thing that we call in the military hip pocket training. That means that we're waiting to get on the plane and we're going to fly from here to another country. And we have 45 minutes while we're waiting on this plane. That 45 minutes, if I'm your squad leader, I'm your platoon sergeant, we're going to train on something. We're going to go over weapons, explosives, raids, ambushes. We're going to train on something. So it's ongoing, daily. The things that are important to you and your organization, you never stop training that until it becomes second nature to you.
Do you believe in like the fundamentals as the core training?
The fundamentals in regards to strength and conditioning, is that what you're asking me?
I guess as a more of a general philosophy for things, just how you approach most training.
Yes, I definitely believe that you must master the basics. You must be excellent at the fundamentals, regardless of what it is. If it's military training, it was the same. If it's strength and conditioning, it's the same. So regardless of what it is that you're doing, you have to get the basics first, and then you have to master the basics, and then you can proceed from there. You can't get to a point where you thinking outside of the box when you don't know what's in the box. So you have to get the fundamentals, what's in the box first.
It seems like you're full of all these little metaphors. I like these little metaphors outside the box. So you're a coach now, and relationships is all about communication. And I said earlier that you've stood out to me as one of the best, if not the best, communicators in this whole group of coaches that we're involved with. So what has coaching taught you about speaking, forming relationships, listening, all of these communication skills?
Wow. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. I've never considered myself to be that, but I'm glad that I've had that impact on you. My whole idea when I started doing this was to be able to reach young people and have things of value that would make them better. The strength and conditioning part is the tool I use to relate to them and get the buy-in from them. It's something that I had to have that I could offer them. The underlying part of that is to guide young boys and young girls into young men and young women, is that I wanted to be able to teach them life lessons. And that was the most important thing to me. I use the strength and conditioning as a way of having a class and getting them in the weight room. And I want them to physically be better, but they have to understand that they have to mentally be better, emotionally be better. So that holistic approach is what I'm after, even though that doesn't fall within my job description.
So it sounds like you value what you're really looking to do in the world is steer younger people in the right direction so they don't go down the wrong path.
That's it exactly. And I've purposely chosen positions at schools that have had young people with troubled past or live in difficult circumstances to be that person for them. Because, and you've heard me talk about before, I've had some things happen during my teaching career that far surpass me teaching a young person how to properly do a squat or how to clean. It's irrelevant. If you have no food at home, you really could care less about doing a shoulder press. You want something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been the reason that I do what I do, because I wanted to connect with them and to do what I could to help them. If I couldn't help them personally, I want to be able to provide a resource. You can't do any of that if you don't have buy-in and trust. And I use the weight room to get me to buy-in, and them working with me to build the trust. And then they in turn open up. I can take what they say to me and reframe that and relate it to how it applies to stuff that's happened in my life. So if they give me this bit of information, I can give them this bit about a particular circumstance or something that happened in my life or some other student I've had in the past. And that's how I build a relationship. And it takes time. But during that time, when you build that relationship, when they're going through difficult things, they will come to you with those difficulties. And that's what I wanted more so than, that's always been what I wanted. And it surpassed me teaching them how to squat or clean or do a shoulder press.
What's so important about them having someone at school to listen to them?
Because they don't always have somebody at school to listen to them, you know. So, and this is not a knock on people at school. People at school have a profession and an area that they're experts in, and they want to convey that to the students, and that's their job. They believe, if I'm a financial teacher, I'm here to teach you about finances, and if you learn that, I've done my job. My mindset is different, that I want to know what's going on in your life, because even though you're in my finance class, you may have not chosen this class, or there could be things going on in your life that you could care less about my finance class or being in school, period. You might not even have a will to live, period. And that's the part that I want to know about, and I want to see if I can help you with, because you want to give every student an opportunity to be the best version of themselves.
Something's coming up for me. What do you think it is that's causing this? Because when you look at the statistics, it seems like we're on this upward trajectory for suicide rates. And to be honest, that is the problem that I want to solve in the world, because I haven't had a personal experience with any of my friends doing it or anything like that. But just seeing it happen, and personally having gone through similar things of dark spots, I don't want people to go through that. Why? What's going on in the world that's causing kids especially to even consider taking their lives?
So it's easy to throw it on social media and say it's social media and that's it. And that's not what I'm saying at all. But what I will say is, there's rarely anything going on in the world that wasn't going on 20 years ago, 50 years ago. What we have now is more access to a lot more information, the same way as we can find for strength and conditioning, a lot more information than we could 20 years ago. Kids see a lot more about other people. You know, you can't find a video of me doing anything in high school, and thank God for that. Just because we didn't have social media there. Imagine the pressure that puts on you when something happens that's not favorable and somebody has that on video, or somebody has that and then they share it and it goes viral. Or you living in difficult circumstances and there is no teacher at school or person that you have relationships with, and you getting physically abused or sexually abused, and you have nobody to confide in. then what are you going to do? You're 14, 15 years old. You know, I talked about that in the teenage brain about your frontal lobe not being fully developed. You can't make a good decision because your decision making isn't fully developed. So you want a way out. And for some kids, suicide is what they see as their way out. So like you said, to be on that quest to at least be on the get that trajectory going down, we have to make ourselves more available to them. And I think we do that by building those relationships that you just alluded to.
So it's because our lives are so exposed. So it seems like any little mistake you could make could actually end up ruining your status, your reputation.
Right. And again, I spoke about this part in the teenage brain too, that the most important thing to a teenage kid is their peers. I mean, think about that. That's what matters the most to them, more so than friends, more so than friends, more so than their relatives and their neighbors is their friends, their social group. That's the most important thing in the world to them. And for something to go awry, that they look bad in front of that social group is the worst thing that can happen to them. Because again, everything with them at that age with young adults is multiplied. Something that we think is no big deal to them is life altering and earth shattering.
That makes sense. I think I can remember a couple times in high school where maybe it took things a little too far.
Right.
You've brought up this teenage brain book a couple times. So why don't you talk a little bit about the impact that's had on you?
You spoke earlier about my coaching style and how the military or my time working at the penitentiary probably impacted that, and it did. And I used to admit to that, and I admitted to it with pride. Like, I'm a soldier, I'll always be a soldier. Retired federal law enforcement. I spent the majority of my life doing this. This is a part of me, it's a part of my identity, it's part of who I am. And I brought that with me into coaching high school students. Very militaristic, my way or the highway. Until I read that book by Dr. Francis Jensen. And that didn't happen until I had a student in my class commit suicide. And I realized that the way I was doing it, there's no way this is the best way to do it. That there had to be a better way to handle situations and to interact with students. And I was literally in Barnes and Noble in that bookstore with my daughter. I was in the education section when I saw her book, and I picked it up and just flipped through the front cover, and then I read the back of the book, and that was enough for me to purchase that book. And once I started reading it, it just drew me in. And I've said before, I've read that book more than I've read any other book in my life, probably with the exception of the Bible, because it made such an impact on me. Things that I didn't know. I understood that high school kids weren't adults, but I didn't understand how things impacted them. I would have never thought that their peers are more important than their parents, but they are at that age. I wouldn't have thought that what a circumstance or situation would happen to them and it would be magnified so much when, to me, it wasn't that big of a deal. I didn't know that about them. I was like, you're a little person, you'll get it later on in life, let's keep going. And it's just not that simple with them.
So what's going on in their brain with this magnification and some of these other effects that are happening?
It's just that because they can't make good decisions, their seat of executive decision maker, Dr. Jensen calls it, doesn't develop until you're at the age of 25 or 26. So they make a lot of really bad decisions based on emotions. And with the hormones that are running through their bodies and their brains not knowing how to regulate those hormones, and they're being flooded with them now, everything is magnified. So the same way we were talking earlier, you know, you take a hit of nicotine, you try a cigarette, okay, it's no big deal. For them, it's a huge deal because of how their brain reacts to that substance. A 59-year-old brain is no big deal. To a 15-year-old brain, they're hooked for a long time. They get hooked a lot faster and they get hooked a lot harder on the same things, whether it's nicotine or street drugs or alcohol or whatever.
So they get hooked. Is is the negative way of establishing a habit just the opposite of a positive way? So, the way we build, say, our skills in the gym, is that the same way we build this negative habit of vaping?
Yes, Dr. Jensen said that it is the exact same way. The same way we build good habits is the same. She said it's learning. So regardless if you learning is learning, regardless if it's a good habit or a bad habit, it's still learning, and the brain responds to it the same way. And as you spoke about previously, the dopamine that gets released if it's a good habit or a bad habit, and they crave that dopamine release. It's still learning.
How do you get these kids to? Have you been able to have this kind of influence where you've been able to see kids doing some maybe more negative behaviors and you're able to steer them in the right direction?
Absolutely, but I couldn't tell you precisely to what extent. Like, I've had some situations that were bad and they got better, and then I've had some that were bad and they got worse and then they got better. It varies, kind of like training. It depends on what the genetic makeup. Some people have a ceiling here and some people have a ceiling there. The way they respond to what I say, and you could take the same kid. I told you earlier that I wanted to show my students your YouTube video on vaping, because the way they respond to me and vaping, me telling them, hey, you shouldn't do this, is not the same way they'll respond to you, because you have actually experienced that yourself. You've had the positive at first, I get that little rush. I got this new toy. This is fun, until this thing is controlling my life and I'm a slave to the vape. They can relate to what you're saying. I'm just an old man going, stop vaping. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? It's stupid. You get nothing from it. You see what I'm saying? We're giving them the same information, but because you come from a different place than I do, you have a different perspective. They can relate to your perspective. And I'm just a grumpy old man saying, stop doing everything they want to do that's fun.
Does that have anything to do with because you're similar in age to their parents and they're rebelling against their parents at that age?
And again, it could be for some, but I think it's the matter of the experience part. When somebody always says, say no to drugs, or somebody say, President Ronald Reagan, his wife, Nancy Reagan, you say no to drugs, say no to drugs. Or people say abstinence, don't have sex. As soon as you tell them not to, they want to do that. Because they want to be rebellious, but you're the person that's not doing it, telling them not to do it. If you've never had a drink before, then they don't want you telling them not to drink, because you've already made that decision not to. They want somebody that already drank, tried it, and the life went in the toilet. And then they can say, hey, this is why you shouldn't drink, because I did, and I ran off the road and killed somebody. I went to jail for 20 years. It's a dumb thing to do. They're more likely to listen to that person than the priest going, you shouldn't drink because it's frowned upon in the good book. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes me think of just experience and results. You've gotten the result for yourself, and if you've gotten that, then they're way more likely to trust you. That doesn't mean I don't think that you couldn't necessarily have the impact. But yeah, I guess on the topic of experience, I'd like to take a little side note and go into more of the prison backstory, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about how did you end up getting to Leavenworth, and then what did you learn there, even just about whether it's about relationships or communicating and dealing with that situation.
So when my term in service was over and I was honorably discharged, all I had been trained to do is fight, fight, fight. Well, when you come back to the civilian world, nobody's looking for anybody to go pull raids and ambushes or do recons. So you really have no occupation that you've prepared yourself for. So when I got out, my mother said, the prison down the street is hiring, go put in an application there. And I did. And I started in the state of Virginia working for the state. And I worked there for a year. And that's how I found out that the federal government paid more. So I started at a prison in California, making twice what I was making in the state. And then I promoted from an officer to a lieutenant in Phoenix, Arizona. So I leave Victorville, California, go to Phoenix, Arizona. After almost 2 years there, I promote again from Phoenix, Arizona. I go to Leavenworth, Kansas. And I got out here to the Midwest and fishing and hunting and everything I did when I was a kid. And I just stayed there for 17 years. And after 23 years total service, I retired. So I learned a lot from being in that environment about leadership and about people, basically. So you asked me, what did I learn? One of my biggest takeaways from being in that prison environment is that you need the importance of having a mentor. You need to have a mentor. And even to this day, I still have mentors. And you needed that if you were going to not only survive, but thrive and be your best. And there's a need, there's a want for you to be your best because other people's lives depended on you being your best. So if you wanted to be competent at your job, if you wanted to be the best and you wanted to make sure all your officers went home at the end of the shift, then as soon as I got there, I had mentors.
How did the mentors impact you? And like, who were these mentors? How did that interaction happen?
Initially, and they were varied. Initially, when I got to Leavenworth, to the penitentiary, there were 17 lieutenants. So I was the newest of 17. I'm watching these lieutenants and I picked who I perceived to be the best of the best. And then I kind of shadowed that lieutenant. Wherever he went, I went. And he taught me everything he knew. And then you have to pick an administrator, associate warden, or warden. So you pick somebody higher than you, something that you aspire to be later on in your career. And then you have to look at the officer ranks and the best of the best, because lieutenants, we came in and left every few years. But the officers, a lot of them are from this area, or they were born and raised close to this area or in the Midwest. They've been at their prison. Some of them are second and third generation officers, and they've been at their prison 15, 20 years. So they know it much better than administrators. They know it much better than the lieutenants. So I had officers that were longtime veterans. There were mentors as well. And I did the same. I picked who I perceived to be the best of the best officers, and I relied on them to teach me.
For some people who don't know like how serious this penitentiary is, like Leavenworth is a pretty, it's one of the top. I don't know what the ranking is of how severe it is, but it's not just like a, you made a mistake one night and you're just gonna go in jail for one night, right? So can you walk us through maybe more like a in-person situation of what does it feel like to go into this situation, and what are the interactions with the actual inmates like?
So no, Leavenworth is not you do a couple of weeks or a couple of months and get out. When I first arrived there, we weren't releasing anybody. If you got sent to Leavenworth, you either transferred to another penitentiary for whatever reason, or you died behind that wall. So it was a long-term thing. And initially, when you walk through the doors are sally ported. So what that means is a gate opens up, you walk through, that gate behind you closes, and the other gate in front of you walk through, and you go through a series of gates to get into the wall. And I don't care who you are, how big, how bad, how tough you think you are. When you initially walk through that first set of gates and that door shuts behind you, it makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And when you walk through that last set of doors, every inmate there is looking at you. And so that makes you feel a little uneasy as well, because whatever they were doing before you walk through, you're like fresh meat. They're all staring at you. Who is the new guy? What position do you hold? What are your responsibilities? What are they going to do? Looking for signs of weakness. They're sizing you up. And as soon as you walk into either one of the housing units, or my first stop was into the chow hall, and I talked about this with Brett Bartholomew, you walk into that chow hall, and it's like E.F. Hutton. When E.F. Hutton talks, everybody listens. You walk into that chow hall for the first time, everybody stops and they're looking at you. And I never forget the associate warden. He walked up behind me He said, I want you to walk around here like you got the deed to the son of a bitch in your back pocket. And that's all I needed to hear. So inmates looking at you sizing you up, I'm looking at them sizing them up. But that's when I had to rely on the other lieutenants, the other officers, because it's so large and you have so many keys. And my biggest fear was somebody called for help and I couldn't make it to them because I didn't know which key opened what door. And that would have been a horrible thing. I mean, just imagine that you were running from point A to point B and you can see over there, this officer is getting stabbed and you can't get through the gate because out of the 37 keys, you don't know which one opens that gate. I didn't want that on my conscience. So one of my first things was learning which keys fit what door, and then learning the contingency or emergency plans for when different situations arose, and then have the officers carry me through and show you what is proper prison etiquette. Who sits with who sits where. You know, some people have gambling tables that their gang runs. Some people have booze that they make and sell. Some people run the drugs. Some people run the prostitutes. Like, everybody does something. They have a business pretty close to what they were doing in the street. And you have to learn how these businesses operated, because you have to communicate with the inmates just like you do the staff. So your communication is not just lieutenant to officers, but it's lieutenant to lieutenant, lieutenant to officers, lieutenant to administrators, lieutenant to inmates, if that, all of that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense to me. And my curiosity is going to, you said you have to actually be friends with them in a way. You didn't say friends, but you said you have to have a relationship. So are you actually like, do you form like, what is that relationship like? Like, it's obviously like you don't want to like get really close with them and be friends. They might be trying to, get things from you because they know you have more power than them. So how do you go about that?
Right. You have to by what I mean by having a relationship is you have to be able to approach them and talk to them, have a conversation with them. So if there's something going on between your gang and the next gang, I have to be able to approach that gang leader and be able to say, if there's beef and we can squash it, let's do that. Or if there's beef and somebody's got to die behind this, then I got to ship out a whole gang so we don't have a killing. So if you don't have that relationship and you just feel there's tension in the air, because you can feel the tension, it's as thick as pea soup. You can feel when there's tension in the air, but if you don't know who to talk to find out what's happening, next thing you know, you have dead convict bodies everywhere. And then you look like you're incompetent because you didn't have a relationship where you could go to this person and talk to them. And if you were a decent person and you're not friends with them, you can never be that. You're not friends with them. But if you were a person of integrity, that when you said something, you did what you said, then they would talk to you as much as they were allowed to without doing what they call being a snitch. So if your gang and my gang had a problem, I could say, no, me and Max got a problem. We ain't squashing it. They knew that either somebody in your gang was going to die or mine. So somebody had to get locked up and had to get transferred, our whole gang, whether it's 10 people or 40 people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And yeah, I'm sure you've experienced a lot of dark visuals and stories. And I don't want to go too deep into it and have to put those images into people's minds. But the one thing that's popping up for me is that you using this word snitch and using gang, and kind of, it almost reminds me of the high school culture, because not necessarily gangs, but there's these cliques and there's these snitches, and it's like this same kind of idea. Obviously it's a little different, they're not inmates, but what's the correlation between that culture and the one you're in right now?
Well, I always say the prison is a microcosm of society, but it's very much like the teenage brain where everything is amplified. So whether it's the high school level or whether it's, the people that's working at Walgreens, you still have your different little cliques, your different little groups. They have their own language that they use because of their profession. The high school is no different. The thing I always tell the kids, and I make reference to my time at the penitentiary a lot, but I said the only difference is y'all get into a fight and videotape it, and somebody smacks somebody a couple times, and then y'all videotape it, and then you break it up, and then you send it out, and then everybody gets expelled because you've sent us all the evidence. In the penitentiary, somebody's gonna stab somebody in the neck. I mean, they don't fight with their fists. It's always violent, and it's always the intent of killing another human being. They don't always kill them, but the intent there is to kill them. So they don't play games, and they don't joke around like high school kids joke around and mess around and play around. Inmates don't. You do something you don't supposed to, you can say something you don't supposed to, and you can die behind that.
So you have those, and the inmates almost have like a crew that backs them up.
Yeah, you have to. I was born and raised in Kansas City, and I've never been in a gang. If I get sent to prison, I have to belong to some gang. If you don't, then you will be sexually assaulted by numerous people. So as soon as you get there, you're gonna have to find a gang. And there are all kinds of gangs. There are prison gangs that were formed, that started in prison and will always be in prison. And then there are street gangs that those people have been incarcerated. So we have street gangs in prison, we have motorcycle gangs, we have race gangs, and we have geographical gangs. So if you're from Kansas City and you're not a Blood or a Crip, then you might belong to the Kansas City boys. You'll be in their gang. There's even religious gangs. So, the Christian guys all sit over here. The Muslim guys sit over here. The Bloods here, the Crips here, the Aryan Brotherhood here, the Mexican Mafia there. Like, everybody has a place, and you know your place. But you can't be by yourself. You won't survive.
Yeah, again, that's like high school, and it's funny. Maybe it's not funny, but well, you got the band kids, and you got the sports and the jocks. But then another thing you notice a lot too is races. All the black kids sit together, all the white kids sit together, the Mexican kids sit together. It's like it makes sense because they have a common connection, and but a certain part of me actually doesn't necessarily love seeing that. In schools, it's like you would rather see everybody kind of together and not as segregated from each other.
Like you said, it's not funny, haha, but funny, strange that you noticed that, because that was one of the first things I noticed when I started teaching. I was like, inmates segregate themselves out of necessity. The kids segregate themselves out of what? I don't know. They have voluntarily decided to segregate themselves. And, you can be on the team, baseball, basketball, softball, volleyball, whatever, that's multiracial, but you go watch them when they're sitting there and eating. And like you said, they sitting with their same color groups. I was like, they segregate themselves just like inmates. And I thought it was me just because of my background. That I'm just looking at it, go, everything is like inmates, but it's true. They voluntarily segregate themselves based on race.
And it must be a deeper human thing that we just kind of, we move towards what is familiar to us, and that's the definition of the comfort zone at the end of the day. So we don't want to go too far outside of what we know, because right. So it does make sense. But yeah, it's I don't know the answers to the race problems in the world, but yeah. So when you get a student and maybe they're struggling emotionally, you could tell something's up. You said you listen to them, but how do you get them to trust you to be that guy who will actually absorb what they're saying?
I'm not exactly sure how that happens outside of what I told you earlier about having the buy-in and then building the trust. And I'll give you an example. I first started teaching, it was within my first 2 years. And I was working with a head football coach, and his whole thing was he only wanted football players in the weight room, did everything in his power to get females out of the weight room. And even, sending notes to the counselor, anytime a female showed up on the roster, she doesn't work hard, she's lazy, get her out. And I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm trying to get every female I can in there, because as I tell people, I have 2 daughters and a son. And my daughters can lift just as good as my son. They have better techniques, both of them. My son's just strong because he's male and he has more testosterone. But get more females in the weight room, because now we can have more weight training classes. We can co-teach and have double classes. Like if you have a nice weight room, why wouldn't you want to have double classes from first period all the way through eighth period and then have students in at the end of the day, instead of running away people and then just getting rid of, you know, everybody that's not a football player. So he's doing one thing, I'm doing another. And this young lady walks up to me that's in my class and tells me that there's an adult male that wants her to send him nude pictures of herself. And he said if she doesn't, he's gonna shoot up the school. Of course, I have to report this right away. I reported, assistant principal takes it to the principal takes it to the district office. They reach out to Lincoln Police Department. Everything's under control. Situation was resolved. They found out who this adult male was. Police connected with him. That's all I knew about that. That's all I have to know about that. They don't tell me anything else. It's above my pay grade. This is what I would tell you. For a 15-year-old girl, 15, maybe 16, she was a sophomore. For her to be comfortable enough with me, to approach me, to tell me that there's an adult male trying to get nude pictures of her, and for her to tell me, and I can report that to my administration so they can act on this, was huge. And there's nothing I can tell you that I did specifically to make her trust me enough to tell me this, but she did. And even when I had reported that, and I'll tell you this, I reported that to the administration, they had to hear it from her. And when I sent her up there, she wouldn't go unless I went with her while she told them the same story. But I don't know what I did to make her confide in me and tell me that, and that she would want me with her while she told our school resource officer and the principal the same story.
Maybe it's just your charming personality.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
One of the yeah. I bet some of them would.
Yeah, B's charming, right?
What I heard, one of the quotes you said in your presentation was, you know, what's best for me isn't necessarily what's best for you, or something along those lines. I don't know if that goes along with your idea of like pushing rules onto people, but what does that mean to you?
What was I talking about in regards to that?
I think training, strength training. You know, you had always kind of trained people the same way, and then something clicked for you. Maybe it was the Checklist Manifesto, actually. If you want to talk about that book too, that I don't know how that's impacted you.
Yeah, so the thing with the training was, when I started out myself, I fancied myself a bodybuilder. So I was back and buys, chest, shoulder, tries, and leg day. That's how I broke my body up, and that's how I trained it. And after a few years, there were some power lifters when I was stationed in Hawaii that had noticed me in the gym and that I had a decent amount of strength and convinced me to train and be a power lifter. So then my training went from that to squat twice a week, bench twice a week, deadlift once a week. So now I'm training like a power lifter. I competed as a power lifter for 16 years. And once that career was over, I started Olympic lifting. So everything is snatch, clean, and jerk for 10 years. And here's my point. Regardless of what phase I was in, and I had clients throughout the entire phase. When I was training like a bodybuilder, all my clients trained like body. You could be an ice skater, a baseball player, a volleyball player, or 59-year-old grandpa. Everybody's going to train like a bodybuilder. When I started powerlifting, everybody squat, bench, and deadlift, because you can't go wrong getting strong. Strong is the answer to everything. Everybody trained like a powerlifter. When I started Olympic lifting, there's no use in being strong if you're not powerful. You got to be able to move heavyweight fast. Nothing looks more beautiful than watch a person do a snatch, catch that bar overhead in a full squat. Everybody's got trained like a weightlifter now. We all snatch, clean, and jerk. Whether you general population, whether you're 14 years old, whether you're 59 years old, we snatch, clean, and jerk. And it did. So when I look back on it now, it made absolutely no sense. I know why I did it then, because that's what I was doing. And I've learned as I went, bodybuilding was the top thing. No, powerlifting is the top thing. No, weightlifting. Whatever I'm doing and it's good for me, doesn't mean it's good for you. You're an athlete. I have to train you like an athlete, regardless of what I'm doing. And it took me a while to get there because people are still showing up and they were paying me. And I was young. I look good with my shirt off. People don't show up when you're 59 like they do when you're 19. You got a six pack when
I'm
you're
sure you
19.
still. I'm sure you still look good. I'm sure. You're kind of you're hinting at ATG a little bit, so let's talk about ATG. Just we don't have to dive deep, but how has ATG knees over toes guy training this way? I don't know how long you've been involved, but you've been here for at least a good amount of time this year. How is this training um, maybe rejuvenated some of your like childhood, those good looking six pack days?
Yeah, so I'm into my second year with ATG. I started in November when we were on break from school last year. So this November, yeah, it's been a year and a month. Yeah, so I'm
Wow.
going into my second year with ATG, and I ran across it on the humbug on YouTube. Ben Patrick just came up, and I just brushed it off. And I've said this before. I told Keegan, I said, Ben came up 2 or 3 times in my YouTube feed. And I said, okay, this is a guy, looks good with his shirt off. He got a little pump. He got the baby oil on. He's jumping off the stuff. It's a nice party trick. He looks good. I get it. It makes sense. But it wasn't anything to really interest me until I saw his mother pop up.
Mm-hmm.
When Celia popped up and she was doing an ATG split squat, and she is a year older than I am. When I saw that, I said, that's awesome, because my knees are shot. They wanted to replace my right knee, I think, when I was 35. I was too young. The insurance company said, you're too young. You have to wait until you at least 50. And my doctor said, that's so they don't have to do it twice. If they wait until you're 50, then you'll die before they have to do a second replacement. So when I saw Celia Patrick do that ATG split squat, I said, there might be something to this. So I'm looking at the videos, and Ben had her doing all the foundational exercises. And my knees were so bad then, I said, what do I have to lose? If she's doing it, let me give it a try. And I tried it. And it took, I always tell people, I'm not sure if it's 5 weeks or 6 weeks, but right in that time frame when I noticed the difference. I had been doing it 3 days a week. And I came downstairs to my man cave. And in the mornings, it would be embarrassing if you saw me walk down, because I have to hold on to the rail and walk sideways because my knees ache so bad. It takes a couple of hours for them to lubricate and warm up, and then I can walk like a normal person. After that 5th or 6th week, I was coming downstairs to grab my hoodie, and I literally almost jogged down the stairs. And when I got to the bottom, I said, what the hell just happened? Like, I walked down the stairs without holding on the rail, walking sideways. I said, this ATG crap is working. Like, it really works. So I stayed with it, of course, and then I progressed through, and I started introducing some of my athletes, handpicked them. I looked for volleyball players and basketball players, especially basketball, people notorious for bad knees, and started them walking backwards, doing tib raises, doing calf raises, and they got better. So I was like, there's something to this, and that's when I joined ATG coaches and started my fast track, because I was seeing results, and that's what I want. Even my company where I train on the side, it's called Athletic Results. Like, I train people to get them results, and I got results with this. So I was telling everybody, look at this. It's different. You might even think it's weird, but it works. And that's how I got bought in hook, line, and sinker.
Well, I'm glad you did, and Cecilia convinced you, because that was a convincing video. I sent that to a bunch of people, so I was like, come on, guys, I've been telling you to do this, and now there's a 67-year-old woman doing it.
Right.
It's amazing. One question I've asked a lot of people on my podcast is, I'll give you a little bit of context. Basically, I've been kind of realizing that self-development has a lot to do with how you perceive the world. And what I call it is like mental frameworks. So just little things. A lot of them have impacted me actually come from Ben himself. Like just no excuses ever for anything. And I think Keegan said, observe pain in the body with curiosity. So these different ways of kind of looking at a situation and saying, oh, it's not so bad, and it gives you a new light to kind of kick things off positively. So Are there any frameworks that come to mind that have helped you? You've already given us the controllable one. Are there any other ones?
You know, and I think it was I think it was Seneca that said he pitied the man that has never faced adversity because he doesn't know what he's capable of. And that was huge for me, because I want to say before then, when things happen, it was like, why me? Why me? Why am I going through this? Instead of, it's my time, this is a test, let me rise to the challenge of the test. So I think I try to look at things in that framework. Whenever something happens or whenever something gets difficult, I look at it as a test. Life is a test, and there is no practice exam for it. So obviously you have to stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
So it's like an experiment.
Yeah, it's not necessarily experiment. It's like I said, well, I guess you could call it experience. It's like a test to see if you're capable of doing this. And I'm not trying to impose on anybody's religious beliefs, whatever you believe, but I believe that if you're not capable of doing great things, no great things will ever happen to you. If you're not capable of being a warden in the penitentiary, why would you ever get promoted to that rank of warden? You can't fathom what that feels like on your shoulders, the weight of that. So you have to be tested along the way to see what you can rise to the occasion of, to see what level you would end up at. And, I think the people that, I always tell my kids this, I said, you don't try hard, you're not pushing yourself, you're not applying yourself. I said, but somebody's got to pick up my trash Monday morning. There's nothing wrong with working for the waste disposal company. You can do that if that's your goal. But when I look at you and you tell me you want to be a D1 football player, but you laying over here on the corner still on the foam roller 15 minutes in the workout, that's not work ethic. You're being tested in this class every day. You're being tested. Will you or will you not rise to that occasion? Because if you really want to be a D1 football player, you're going to be bringing it every day. You have to. It's your job. So I think it's the same with all of us in life. I get tested with those difficult kids, like I said, and to see how I respond. And I believe that if I do what I'm supposed to do, I will be given more and more responsibility, increased responsibility. And that's what I want. But if I fail the test, then why would any person, any entity, the creator, the district, why would anybody put me in a position of power when I've not shown you I'm capable of carrying out the duties required of that position? Does that make sense?
Yeah, my brain is linking the two concepts from the beginning when you were talking about and now I'm losing it. Maybe my neuroplasticity is weaker than I thought.
I should have simplified. It's probably my fault.
No. I got it. So training is the training thing. How the mental toughness doesn't exist. It's just about training. So you're saying here, every day is basically a test, and you just need to show up and perform, and just it doesn't necessarily matter if you have a bad day. Just show up tomorrow.
Right. That's it. See, you simplified it. That's it in a nutshell.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could simplify it a little bit for. But you did a great job explaining it out. Yeah, I really like your philosophy on all this stuff. I have a couple other questions, but so as a parent then, what has that been like? What have been some challenges that you faced being a parent?
Man, would I need something more specific? There's a lot. There is a lot, because you're no longer the most important thing in the world. Your child is. So I've really had some challenges as a parent, from not being so selfish, honestly. Like, that's the first thing I say. It's not all about you anymore. It's somebody else. Now it's somebody else that depends on you. And you got to provide for them, which makes you change the way you operate. I was listening to some somebody talked this morning on the podcast, and they said, I fire off an email now. He said, I equate that to the same as, 10 years ago, I would have cursed somebody out for the same thing I'm writing the email. Like, I'm writing this email to bring to your attention that you did this. He said, 10 years ago, I would have cursed the person out for doing that. He said, 20 years ago, I would have put hands on somebody for doing that. But you grow and mature and evolve, and you become somebody different because you have different responsibilities. And that's how it is as a parent, that you have different responsibilities, and you, again, getting tested, have to rise to that occasion. I will tell you this, and you didn't really ask me directly about that, about this situation, but as a parent, if you allow me, the most difficult thing I went through is my youngest daughter. I have 3 children, and my youngest daughter is 15 now. And she was diagnosed with cancer at 10 and a half months of age. And that's the most difficult thing I went through as a parent. Like, you don't know why your child has cancer. Again, like I alluded to earlier, I said, why me? Why me? Poor me. Why not me? But my thing with that was I couldn't wrap my mind around why she had cancer because she hadn't done anything. Like, is just to get back at me? Is it stuff I did that I'm paying for now? You know what I mean? And I had to reconcile myself with that. And I had to do what's in the best interest of my daughter for that, which was 19 weeks of chemo and taking a syringe and clearing out. She had a stent that went into her neck and down her chest. Went from her chest up into her neck, and that's what we had to clean that out every day. And she had to go through chemotherapy. We had to take her to Kansas City, to KU Medical Center for chemo every week for 19 weeks. So as a parent, that has by far been the most difficult thing that I had to go through, my wife and I, as a parent, because that surpasses, somebody calling your kid a name, or somebody hitting your kid, or your kid not making the team, whatever you go through with your children, bad grades, whatever. That was the worst thing that I went through as a parent. So that was humbling, to say the least, and made me really look at myself. And you talked about earlier, do a lot of self-reflection on why is this happening? Why is this going on with me? But why not me? Amor Fati, the Stoic philosophers would say, embrace your fate. You don't look at it and say, why me? You look at it and say, why not me? It's my turn. What am I going to do now? Roll up in a ball and cry? No, I'm going to take my daughter to the doctor. We're going to see the oncologist. We're going to chemo every week. I'm going to give her meds. I'm going to clean out her tubes every day. I'm going to try to get her to eat. If her hair falls out, I'm going to put a scarf on her head, I'm going to keep her away from everybody because our immune system is weak. You can't let her get sick. You do those things. So that has been the toughest part of being a parent, besides the things that all parents go through, skint knees and that kind of stuff.
And she's all right now?
Yeah, she's fine. She had a tumor that had completely encapsulated her left kidney. She had her left kidney removed. They got it out in one piece. And it's called a Wilms tumor, WILMS, and it only affects kids. And I think the youngest case they had on record was 2 weeks of age. The oldest case was 18 years of age. And the strange thing about that, the oncologist said that if you had to have a cancer, this is the type to have, because they've never had a case where it returned. She had to be tested every 6 months to see if it came back until she was 5 years of age. And then from ages 5 to 10, she had to be tested annually. And once she turned 10 and all her tests had been negative, she was cleared. So yeah, she's fine now.
That's amazing. That's good. And one of the biggest things that I think I'm going to take out of this is why not me? I think I'm going to write that. I might write that on my mirror in the bathroom.
Right.
I like that. It takes you out of the victimhood mind, and it puts you in control.
Right.
You were alluding to this idea of self-awareness and your ability to introspect, look at yourself, be honest with yourself. What's so important about that?
Well, when I got into Stoic philosophy, even when you read your history in ancient Egypt, back in the temples of learning had over the doors as you entered, man, know thyself. Like, you have to know yourself. Like, that's even in the biblical text. I would surmise this in all religious texts, that you have to know yourself. You have to know who you are before you can help other people who they are. You have to know who you are, what you're capable of, what you're prone to do and not do. And then once you are honest with that, then you can work on things that you see as weaknesses, and build those up. And once you know yourself as a person, your capabilities, your limits, your knowledge base, then you can reach out and help other people. But if you don't know who you are, how are you going to help other people? Now, I say this to, and I know I'm jumping again, I say this to coaches a lot. You don't have a coaching philosophy. You don't have a personal set of values, but you're in a responsibility where we guide young men and young women to adulthood, but you don't even know who you are. They're trying to find themselves, and you're supposed to help them, but you don't know who you are in order that you can guide them. Yet that I think is fundamental, that you know yourself, and that you're constantly, you have to look at yourself. You have to look at your actions. I journal, my daughter journals, and I look at the things that happened to me today. Say, did I handle that appropriately? Could I have handled that differently? What did I do that was good? What did I do that was not so good? How will I address that if it comes up again? I run that through my head, and then I put the most pertinent things down in my journal. But every day I run through what happened to me during the course of the day. And some things I know that I need to tweak and get better at.
Have you heard of the negative visualization practice of Stoic philosophy?
Oh, yeah. So when I kiss my daughter goodnight and she said, I love you, Daddy, I said, I love you too, baby. What if I wake up in the morning and she doesn't? That makes me appreciate her more right now. And it's not meant to be more, but I know people think that I want to show you something.
Yeah.
Sitting down here in my man cave, hourglass,
Awesome.
skull, flower. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. Remember, you are mortal. So it's a constant reminder to me. And the same thing I told you about when I kiss my daughter at night. When I kiss my wife goodnight, I roll over, she rolls over. What if I roll over in the morning, she doesn't wake up? I appreciate her more right now because I know tomorrow she might not wake up. My neighbor was diagnosed with cancer last year. I look at that and think, what if that's me? What if I get cancer? What if my neighbor, what if he doesn't make it through chemo like my daughter did? What if he dies? So I appreciate Dave more now because he survived that and he's here. And I don't know how close he came to not being here. So I try to do that with my job. I mean, sometimes I get frustrated with my job. Sometimes I take it for granted. But what if I go in tomorrow and they fire me? I won't have this opportunity to impact these kids again. So yeah, I understand the negative visualization. I said all that to say, yeah, I understand it.
I like it. I've never seen it applied that way in such a specific, saying it, thinking that way when you go to bed.
Right.
It's powerful.
Do you use it,
I used it for a while. I would. So basically, if anybody doesn't know, negative visualization it's just the opposite of positive visualization. Instead of imagining your goals, you imagine the worst case scenario. So for a husband and wife, you would actually meditate and imagine the feelings and thoughts that would occur if your wife were to die tomorrow, and what would that situation be like. And then you come back. It's not like you sit there and you sulk in it. It's just a quick thing. And I used it for a long time, but then I've been more so pushing towards the positive lately. So I kind of not, I got it out of my routine, but I really liked it. And it actually did generate a lot of positive emotions in general, because it kind of prepared me for those situations. It doesn't have to be death. It could be the speech doesn't go well tomorrow, what does that feel like? Or
Right.
yeah. So yeah, Stoic philosophy is, I haven't read it probably nearly as much as you have, but it's had some impact on me for sure.
Right.
I
Right.
like that memento thing too,
Mental Mori.
the
Yeah.
reminder of death,
Yeah.
something
No,
important.
yeah, absolutely. So you, I know you've been asking me, but you're doing a lot. I mean, you have a social media presence, of course, and the YouTube channel. So what's next for you? I know this is your interview, but I was like, man, he's so young and he's doing so much. Like, what do you do next? Like, what do you, if you can let that out, or that's a secret, all of a sudden I see your book come out and I go, oh, that's what Max was doing.
I appreciate your intrigue into me. This is the Stuart Venable podcast, though. So I'll keep it short when I say
Yeah,
that
yeah,
my only goal right now is to stay as close to the community that I have found as I possibly can be. And if people don't know what that community is, it's the community that Ben Patrick, KneesOverToesGuy, Keegan Smith, and also now Paul Council is another person I'm learning from. If I stay as close to them as I can, I'm proud, and not only them, but now the fruits of them. So you know,
right,
like this right now is part of my main goal, and
right.
I've picked up so many different pieces of life philosophy and wisdom for me. I feel like we could probably talk all night. Um, I'd like to wrap it up with a final one about storytelling. Um, on a human level, what's so important about stories, and how do you actually tell a better story?
So on a human level, we are wired, and I only get this from, again, the religious text I talked about earlier. From the time I was little, I understood if people told a story, I could remember that, I could retain that. And when I started grade school, you go to school, you learn something, they give you a quiz, they give you an exam, and then that leaves your brain. But for something to go from the short-term memory to be stored in your long-term memory banks, stories helped us. And you know, all the way back to the drawings on the side of caves, to things that our ancestors told that passed from generation to generation. I believe we're hardwired for stories, to both tell them and to absorb the information from them. For whatever reason, we're made that stories stick.
Hmm.
And that is the thing that prompted me to tell stories, mostly because of my diverse professions I've had. I started telling stories, and because I'm not good at writing, I hate writing. I'd rather talk than write. So that is the thing that got me into storytelling. I was against it initially because when I was a kid, my dad always told stories. And whenever somebody said something, he would always tell his story to like override their stories. I was like, man, like every time somebody has something to say, my dad has a story about when he did something similar, and it used to drive me crazy. So it was a long time before I even started telling people stories. And then once I did, people started liking them. You know, when I go to conferences, I have my peers that say, hey, you know, we're at the social, it's story time with Stu. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, come on, give us a prison story. Tell us a
Story.
military story. Yeah, it's story time with Stu. I was like, this is ridiculous. But even my wife's friends, we all get together, they go, Stu, tell us a story, tell us a story. And I've not had any formal training, or I didn't go to school for, you know, making film or movies or anything. So I don't know how stories should go. I just have things that happen that have impacted my life, and I just try to share that with other people as succinct as I can.
I think you do a really good job. And maybe if it just happens naturally, maybe it's just something that's in your genetics or something. I'm not sure. Um, can now I know that I said that was the last question, but now I want to know. Let's end it on uh, before you share where people can find you. You can say that after this
Uh-huh.
question, if you don't mind. Can you give us one harsher negative story, maybe from prison, maybe like one of the best stories that you think you could tell? Doesn't necessarily have to have a lesson involved. If it's just a good story, and then end us on a positive story about whatever you want to do, whatever you want to take it, wherever in your life. It could be your childhood, your any one of your 5 lives, whatever.
So a negative story. I was working at the prison, and I didn't understand the level those guys would go to if somebody did something that they considered disrespectful. I mean, nothing that was blatantly disrespectful, like a no big deal kind of things. And I remember one of the very first things I saw, I'm standing in the chow hall, and that's where inmates come from different cell blocks, and they're all coming in to eat together. And there's a line, and you get in line and go through the chow line and get their food. Well, I'm standing there, and this guy comes in the door, and he just kind of walks up and gets in line in front of one of his friends. And a guy behind him goes, "Hey man, the line's back there." And all he said was, "F you, this is my boy," whatever, stayed in line. And the dude didn't even blink that he had cursed. Went through the line, got the food. The guy that was behind him went to the back, and he worked in food service, so I didn't think anything of it. Well, he came back out, and he walked past the table, and the two guys that were in the line in front of him that he told was cutting line, they were sitting at a table together, and they were talking. He walked right by the table, and I'm sitting there watching him, and when I saw him, it looked like he just hit him in the chest, kind of like that, across the stomach area. Mm-hmm. I was like, no big deal. I was like, oh, for a minute there, I thought they were going to fight from the little exchange they had, but it wasn't that big a deal. And he just kept walking. The guy got up from the table, and he had cut his stomach all the way across, and his intestines were coming out. And he was trying to put him back in his stomach with his hands, and he was walking toward me because he wanted help. And I was like, Officer needs assistance. I'm telling him to get back, because you're bleeding all over the place. I don't want your blood on me. And there's nothing I can do with your guts coming out. And he just collapsed right there. Of course, staff responds. They respond with a gurney, get him on the gurney. They take him to the hospital. But just that quick, he literally opened him up, disemboweled him for saying, look, you did something wrong. I checked you about it, and you disrespected me, and now you got to pay the consequences. So those were the consequences. I was like, just for saying F you, he got his guts opened up. So that was one of the first things I saw that kind of got my attention. I remember the associate warden said, no matter what you see in here, you act like you've seen it before. A good story, a good note, positive. Another prison story.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I tell the kids, you have to be careful what you say, because you can let something come out of your mouth that you can't put back in, and you don't know the consequences. You'll have to pay for that. So words, watch your words.
That's where the microcosm idea comes in, because obviously you're probably not going to get stabbed in the real world, but maybe you could, you never know who's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You never know who's out there. So I'm working in the recreation department, and I want to do something because there's so much talent in the prison setting. I mean, unbelievable how talented these guys are. And you look at them, you think, if you would put this talent to work instead of trying to bring over, 10 kilos from Colombia, you could have done pretty good for yourself, but they don't put their talents to work until they're incarcerated, and they can't, whatever, rape, rob, steal, whatever. So I started, it was right before I opened a CrossFit facility back in 2007. So 2006, I see it, I was like, oh, this will work. Like, people will do this. People will pay money to do this. So I'm going to get one of my inmate workers. I said, hey, I need you to try this workout. Okay, he's going to try. He did it, and he had a healthy status that other guys saw him doing it. They started doing it. So before you knew it, I had a whole group of inmates. They'd come out and go, hey, V, what's the workout? What's the workout? So I put them through a workout, right? So the guy that first started it for me, I had him training the other inmates there. So, I done made him an assistant coach. So now I don't have to go out there. He can show them what the workout is and whatever. He ends up getting out in a couple of few, say 2 or 3 years. So what I did from this was we did online training for inmates to get their personal training certification. So I would have to give the classes, and a teacher in the education department would proctor the exam, and then the inmates would get their personal training certification. They had to pay for it themselves. The family sent in, I think at that time it was like $150. But you get your personal training certification. If you got to do 40 years, it'll do you no good. When this guy got out in 2 or 3 years, he got out originally from Boston. He didn't go back home because he said, I'll revert to my old lifestyle. He stays in Kansas City. He's working at a well-known gym. He gets a job. I see him at a conference. And I'm like, man, you working, making, and at that time he was making about $50,000. I said, just think about it, man. Like, you're making $50,000 a year. And when you work for me, you make $5.25 a month. That was the lowest amount we could give anybody. It's called maintenance pay. I was like you talking about a success story. You have arrived. And I never forget, he had a little girlfriend. She worked at the gym as well. And he was driving a Mustang. I'm like, here's a guy that had got incarcerated, lived on the East Coast. He comes to the Midwest. He goes to prison. And now he's out and he's working and he's making $50,000 a year, not $5 a month. And the last time I saw him in person, he was the master trainer in this organization. So he went from, I'm just a personal trainer, to the head of all the personal trainers at this global gym, and was engaged to his girlfriend, and she was then his fiance the last time I saw him in person. So I was like, man, that's what I envision. Like, when you get, because the recidivism rate is like 67, almost 70%. So I was like, if they had a skill when they got out, they wouldn't go back to doing what they were doing, which for him was drugs. So see, a happy story.
It's a beautiful story. It's a story of freedom and your worlds colliding. So yeah, I've learned a lot tonight, and I'm probably gonna run this one over a couple times and rethink about some of these ideas. But yeah, I just want to thank you. I'm very grateful that you were willing to come on to this podcast. I think you shared a lot of really important wisdom about relationships, and not only the ones that we have with the people in our lives, but the ones we have with ourselves. How do we talk to ourselves? How do we remain, in a positive state? And how do we understand what's going on in our brain? If you're a younger listener, and even, there's so many other topics we could have dove into, because you seem to have a wide array of different, you're somehow like a neuroscientist and a bodyguard at the same time. But yeah, thanks for sharing some experiences that might be more personal, that others wouldn't be open to. And yeah, I hope everybody kind of can take some snippets from you and incorporate them into their lives.
Yeah, thank you, Max. I really appreciate it. I mean, it's an honor for me to be on your podcast. Like, I had texted you, I was like, I'm an old man, high school strength coach. Nobody wants to hear what I've done or what I'm doing. I just really don't think it's that big a deal. I know everybody has a story, but I don't think mine's is more important than anybody else's story. So for you to invite me onto your podcast, I was honored. I'm humbled by that. And I like it even more that you're so young and you have so much ahead of you and such an opportunity to do great things, that I'm looking forward to your future. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I think the one thing that I'm really inspired by you is that, obviously you give out the kindness, like you keep referring back to me, but also just your desire to help people. And maybe it wasn't as obvious when you were in the prison that you were necessarily bringing people up, but what you're doing, I think your whole life has kind of come together and taught you the lessons that you need now to help these kids. And I think these kids are lucky as hell to have you. So we'll have to do this again sometime for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna be getting some sleep tonight. I hope you get some good rest, and don't forget to do your negative visualization. Um, And yeah, thanks for coming on, and we'll speak soon.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.
See you.
See you.